so to speak. They don't know what they're doing. Incidentally, is there any aspect of what they were doing that they didn't know what they were doing? Okay, they didn't realize that they were crucifying the Son of God. I'm sure that's what Jesus meant. Did they know that what they were doing is probably something they shouldn't do? I mean, we can look back at all the ramifications. Well, these guys were Roman soldiers, and they were putting somebody to death who was a criminal, but they were doing it in an unusually cruel way. At any rate, Jesus was having so much compassion for them while he was their victim that he was asking his Father to forgive them. We'll talk about that some too. One of the passages that I always go to is in Matthew 18. And it starts at verse 21 where Matthew 18:21, where Peter says to Jesus, "Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him?" How does the rest of it go? I'm sure you know. 7 times? Do you imagine Peter thought that was a pretty generous amount? That's what I'm thinking. The text doesn't say that, but I'm imagining he was offering 7 times as a generous amount. And listen, if my brother sins and I forgive him 7 times, that's quite a bit. Do I have to go beyond that? What did Jesus say? 70 times 7. And I really don't think he meant 490. Once he sins the 491st time, he's out of there. Now the word, I don't always go back to the Greek, because sometimes it's a little redundant. When the translation is really good of a Greek word into English, I don't usually mess with it. But in this case, the Greek word for forgiveness is aphiemi. Aphiemi. Say that with me. Aphiemi. Aphiemi. All right. That's a combination of 2 words, apo, which means from, and hiemi, which means to send. So when we're talking about forgiveness, we're talking about sending something from us. In other words, we don't hold on to it anymore. We let go. We forgive. What was the English word that we usually recall from Acts 2:38 that's in the King James? Be baptized for the remission. What's the context that we almost always hear that word used in? Cancer? Cancer goes into remission? Because what do we want to do with cancer? We want to send it from us. That's what we want. We want to send it away from everything. Isn't that awful to hear about little Wyatt? You've got to see an oncologist because he's got problems with cancer. I don't like to hear those kinds of things. But cancer is a threat to our physical health. Sin, however, is a threat to our spiritual and eternal health. Now, when I think about sin, and we're going to come back to this Matthew 18 in just a second. Think about the ramifications of sin. What are the wages of sin? Death. Can I pay those wages? I don't mean this to be a trick question, but a thought-provoking question. Can I pay the wages of sin? I can. What do I have to do to pay him? I have to die. That's my payment for my sin. Now, we don't usually talk of it in those terms because nobody wants to die eternally for their sin, but that's how I would have to pay for my sin if not for Jesus Christ. Can I pay for anybody else's sin? No, I'm limited. I can pay for my sin. I can die for my own sin, and that's what's going to happen to everybody who is outside of Christ when the end comes. That's why we preach Christ, so people can come into Christ. But all those outside of Christ will die, and they will pay for their own sin because the wages of sin is death. And so if we sin and we don't have anything to take care of that so we can have forgiveness, then we will pay with our own soul eternally. Yes? Yes. That's true. Okay. All right. In other words, if you wanted to do something about your sins for yourself, the only thing you would have left to you would be to die. And since the death is not something you do one time and you come back from it, you die for all eternity. Now, I can only pay for my sins in that regard, in that aspect of dying for my own sins. I can't die for anybody else's. But God had a plan that He would pay for everyone's sin so there could be forgiveness. There cannot be forgiveness unless there is a payment for the debt. So when we're talking about forgiveness, you and I are talking about forgiveness on a minuscule scale as far as us forgiving other people. Because we can't really pay for their sins. We can only forgive them in our own minds. And that's very important. We shouldn't forget that or negate that. But it really is true that I can only pay for my sins and I can only forgive somebody else in my own mind. But God, in His infinite wisdom and infinite mercy, has paid the debt for everyone's sin so that He could forgive everyone. To me, it helps me put this in perspective. When I think about all the sin that God has to deal with, which is all the sin, it's so much easier for me to forgive any infraction made against me. Am I making any sense? Can you relate to that? Is that, you just shake your head like this, even if you don't know what in the world I'm talking about. What's he getting at? I don't know what he's trying to say. Maybe we'll get around to it because we'll probably spend at least a couple class periods on this. But getting back to Matthew chapter 18. When we get to verse 21, we haven't really begun the context of forgiveness. As a matter of fact, back up to verse 15 and see where we are in the context of chapter 18, Matthew 18. Matthew chapter 18, verse 15. If your brother sins, this is Jesus' instruction to us, if our brother sins, go show him his fault in private. If he listens to you, you've won your brother. What's this all about? This is about taking care of a sinful situation and getting it resolved. It doesn't necessarily say forgiveness, but that's the topic of chapter 18, verses 15 through 20. But that's not the beginning of the context of forgiveness. Back up to verse 12. What do you think if any man has 100 sheep and one of them has gone astray? What's that mean, go astray? Now, for a sheep, it means gets out of the pen, away from the flock. What does it mean for a person? Sin. The wages of sin is death. So there must be forgiveness for that sin. So Jesus is talking about somebody straying from the flock. And he says, if it does the shepherd not leave the 99 on the mountains and go and search for the one that is straying? If it turns out that he finds it, truly I say to you, he rejoices over it more than over 99 which have not gone astray. So it is not the will of your Father who is in heaven for one of these little ones to perish. Wow. Who's the shepherd? It's God. Why does he go out after the sheep? He goes out after the sheep for the express purpose of resolving the issue and granting to that sheep forgiveness, bringing that sheep back into the flock. That's his point in verses 12 through 14. But that's not the beginning of the context of forgiveness. Go back up to verse 7. Matthew 18, verse 7. Woe to the world because of its stumbling blocks. For it's inevitable the stumbling blocks come, but woe to that man through whom the stumbling block comes. What's it mean to stumble? It means to sin. The wages of sin? Death. And so when he's talking about this, there's got to be forgiveness for those who stumble. And he's talking about it here in the context of, you get a little farther down, verse 8, that's not that much farther down, is it? If your hand or your foot causes you to stumble, what are you supposed to do? Whack that baby off. Is he saying literally? Or is this speaking allegorically? Personally, I think he's speaking allegorically. If it's my eye, it's causing me to sin. If your eye, in verse 9, causes you to stumble, pluck it out. Is pulling my eye out going to keep me from thinking the things that I was thinking because of my eye? I really don't think so. It's an interesting question. Do blind people have a problem with lust? I don't think he's talking about cutting off hands, cutting off feet, cutting off eyes. What do you think he's talking about? Talking about whatever it is that's causing you to sin, find a way to get around that. Find a way to excuse yourself out of that circumstance, because that's going to be an infringement. And if you don't get forgiveness for that, you're going to be lost. Then you back up to chapter 18, verse 1. At that time the disciples came to Jesus. Who's the greatest in the kingdom? Of all the things that John talks about that are in the world, lust of the flesh, lust of the eye, what's the third one? Boastful pride of life. That's what chapter 18, verse 1 is all about. Boastful pride of life. That's of the world. That's not of the kingdom. So is there sin involved there? Certainly there's sin. Jesus calls a child to him and he says, whoever humbles himself, oh, we're back to humility. As this child, he's the greatest in the kingdom. Whoever receives such one in my name receives me. But whoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to stumble. So we've got causing somebody to stumble in the first part. Then woe to those who have stumbling blocks. You better cut your hand or your foot or pluck your eye out to keep you from doing that. But if the shepherd's got one sheep that gets out, gets astray, that shepherd's going to go after that sheep until he finds it, so that sheep can be forgiven and brought back into the flock. But what if a brother does sin? Well, you go to your brother, like the shepherd who goes after the sheep that's left the flock. And you talk to your brother so there can be forgiveness, so the resolution can be made, reconciliation can be made. And you do everything you can. You take back witnesses, you take it to the church, everything you can for there to be resolution. But if there can't be resolution, okay, let him be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. But the whole point of that was try to gain resolution so there can be forgiveness. Which gives rise to Peter's question in verse 21. You see, all of that brings us down to this context. How many times can my brother sin? That's right. Right. And that kind of reminds me of the question, who has minor surgery? I think I heard somebody say it. Somebody else. Somebody else. If it's me having surgery, that's not minor. I'm having surgery. Oh, it's just what do you call it when you're in and out the same day? It's just an outpatient procedure. Are they going into my body? That's surgery. That's a big deal. And the whole point is, when we're talking about somebody being lost, we might read this and academically think, okay, so somebody sins, and we try to reconcile, but they don't want to reconcile, so we treat them as a publican and a tax collector. We need to realize the horrible situation that individual's in now. Outside of Christ, unforgiven, lost. And this needs to come down to us because we don't want it to happen to us. We don't want it to happen to anybody else. Harold?
Would it be fair to say that your sin falls in these two categories? One, I can sin with my brother, or I can sin with God. If I have sinned with my brother, and I know the sins against me, I can forgive that if I choose to. Be sincere about it, and I should.
Sure.
I cannot forgive sin of God if it's supposed to sin against God. I cannot forgive that. Just to have to forgive what I can forgive, I probably God takes care of his part.
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, with Jesus on the cross, because Jesus asked God to forgive those who were crucifying him, does that mean God's now obligated to forgive them? No. God is not obligated. He will decide who's going to get forgiveness and who's not. When you have someone who sins and you're struggling with, well, should I forgive them? Don't ever think if you forgive them they will now escape justice. Because God is the God of justice. And if you forgive them, and even if you ask God to forgive them, it is still His option whether or not He's going to forgive them. This is why it's so easy when we get everything right in our head. It's easy to forgive somebody who's sinned against us, because that doesn't mean they get off scot-free. What that actually means is we get off scot-free. How does that make sense? Now, don't hold up your hand. Maybe I should ask it this way instead of the way I was going. Have you ever known of somebody who held a grudge and it really made them a better person? I have heard that holding grudges is a very difficult thing to do because it makes you bitter. There's that aspect of bitterness that grudges take you towards. Somebody said, I think very wisely, that the only thing that won't get better if you nurse it is a grudge. And there's that idea of nursing a grudge. Forgiveness is what God is going for. Look at the great lengths to which He has gone to provide a means to forgive everybody. He sent His own Son. His Son's death was the culmination of a plan that they put together before the foundation of the world. That's how important forgiveness is to God. And so when I see that in light of my own circumstance and somebody doing something that makes me angry, they have offended me in some way, okay. Does it make me better to hold on to that? Is that going to improve my life? Is that going to change my outlook to more rosy and shiny and peaceful if I hold on to that infraction? Joe? Yes. Sure. But there's a way to remember that, well, I think it's the 79th Psalm. No, I know it's the 79th Psalm. Verse 8. I don't know how every translation has this rendered, but this is the New American Standard at Psalm 79, verse 8. It says, do not remember the iniquities of our forefathers against us. Against us. We do not have the capacity to flip a switch and, okay, I'm going to forget that ever happened. We can't do that. Our memories don't work that way. Seems like mine does when I don't even flip the switch. I forget plenty of things. But it won't work like that for these kinds of situations. What I can do, however, is decide when I remember that, I will not remember that against them. I will choose to forgive them. And knowing that God is the God of the universe and the judge of the universe, I can say, God, forgive them. I forgive them. And it's not really, is it for their good or for your good that you forgive? Do you think when they're sitting at home doing whatever they do and you decide you're going to forgive them, do you think their heart gets lighter? Oh, I think he just forgave me. I don't think it works like that. I remember, of all people, Oprah Winfrey. I don't watch a whole lot of Oprah Winfrey, but years ago I was watching a show of hers and she was talking about how somebody had done her something wrong years before and she just held on to that, been angry about them, and then she saw them one day. And that individual was having a wonderful day and a wonderful time, and she thought, well, that's not fair. I've been angry at them. They're supposed to be miserable. And she realized, well, my anger didn't make them miserable. It made me miserable. And so she realized the truth that God is trying to teach us, that when we hold on to things, it doesn't do us any good. Now, if we're talking about, because there's a whole range of possibility here, if somebody does something against you and it's something that needs to go to law, you need to take it to court. You're out in the driveway and somebody's throwing paint at your house or something, hey, call the law. Forgiveness is one thing, but making somebody responsible for the wrong that they have done is another. And you can forgive somebody and still hold them responsible for the wrong that they've done. We do it with our children all the time. I always forgave our kids when they did something wrong. As soon as they did it, I knew, okay, I forgive you. Now let's go to the bathroom. I'm going to spank your bottom. The only time I gave spankings was when I knew that whatever they did was a challenge to our authority. And that's the way I think it works with God. If they spill their milk, oh, that's an accident. Let me get a towel and help you clean that up. Here, you work on cleaning this up. We'll get this taken care of, and everything will be over. You're fine. Unless they spilt their milk because they were doing something stupid at the table that I told them not to do. And you see, Courtney knows all about this. If they didn't stop it, well, that's a challenge to my authority. You told me to stop this, and I'm not going to stop this. And I spilled the milk. Oh, man, well, here's the consequence. Now you got to clean up your milk. Now I'm going to take you in the bottom. I'm going to bust you. Or take you in the bottom. Take you in the bathroom. I'm going to bust your bottom. It's one thing to forgive. It's another thing to hold people responsible. And there are times when we need to hold people responsible for things they've done wrong, but at the same time, have a forgetting attitude, a forgiving spirit towards them. Nothing wrong with that. It's all about how does it affect us? And usually that's the best way you can answer it for yourself. How is this affecting me? If I'm holding on to this infraction against me, is it making my life better, easier, more peaceful? Or do I go to bed with gall in my mouth every night? Nobody wants that. This is one of the reasons that God has said, if you're anxious about anything, tell me about it. Somebody's sinned against you and you're anxious about, what should I do? Well, tell me about it. Let me handle that. It's like the old saying, tell God your troubles because he's going to be up all night anyway. And he will take care of your troubles. And I'm not talking about asking God for vengeance. Do like Jesus did. Ask God for forgiveness towards those people, but then let him handle it. If I'm the dad and I've got two kids that are playing and one of those kids pops the other one in the mouth and oh, I'm sorry, they apologize to him. Well, fine, you've apologized to your brother or your sister, whoever you pop, that's fine, and I'm sure they'll forgive you. Now you and I are going to go in the bathroom and settle this between you and me. Two different situations. Just making sense? Or am I talking crazy? Okay. So I don't ever want anybody to get the idea, well, if I ask God to forgive him, then he gets off scot-free. Give God more credit than that. He knows what's going on in the universe, and he knows who needs to get what. And he's got resources way beyond our imagination to justly give someone the harvest that they have sown. Remember Galatians 6? As we sow, so shall we reap. That's why when I think about all the stuff I've sown through the years, oh man, it's kind of scary. You ever wonder when's it going to come back on me? I don't know if I've gotten paid for that yet. At any rate, forgiveness is what we're looking for. Questions, comments, observations? Harold?
Matthew 18:60 tell me that if I think my brother sinned, I have a footnote of mine that says that brother sins against me, against you. Go talk to him.
Yes.
Rather than saying, God, this person don't treat me bad, my first response is go talk to him. Go talk to him. See, it may be just simply misunderstanding. It may be something the person didn't accidentally intend to. So I want to call it, but so often we don't choose to do that.
Absolutely.
We spend a lot of nights away, frustrated, involved in the prison. You can just go talk to him, and you might solve that matter real quick. Of course, you might not, but then more than likely, I think you probably would. So I think we bear the burden of trying to solve the difficulties we have so that we can forgive with a good conscience. Not a one-sided sort of thing, but that's all right too. That's the best you can do. One-sided is better than not at all. So I think that's a pretty important strategy too.
I do too. And I think we ought to make a footnote with Matthew 18 to Matthew 5, because in Matthew 5, Jesus is talking about kind of an opposite situation, if you will. In Matthew 5, it says in verse 23, therefore, if you're presenting your offering at the altar, and there remember that your brother has something against you. This is where you have evidently done something wrong. You have sinned. and you need to make it right with somebody else. He says, leave your offering there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother, and come and present your offering after that. Make friends quickly with your opponent at law while you're with him on the way, so that your opponent may not hand you over to the judge to the officer, and you be thrown in the prison. This is what we've been talking about. God is the judge. And if somebody's got something against us, make it right, so you don't have to go before the judge. And this with Matthew 18. In Matthew 18, if somebody else sins. So whether you sin or somebody else sins, if there's a sin that is causing a division between you and a brother or sister, Jesus says, don't wait for them to come to you. Whether you sin or they sin, go to them, because what's this all about? It's about forgiveness. Forgiveness that allows reconciliation. Forgiveness that allows unity. Forgiveness that allows the family relationship that we're supposed to have in Christ. Forgiveness that allows peace. Because if you haven't forgiven, if you've got something you harbor against somebody else, there will be no peace until that gets resolved. And so Jesus is telling us, whether I've sinned or the other guy sinned, I'm supposed to go to him. None of this, well, he said this or he did. I'm just going to wait until they see if they ever come and tell me that they're sorry for what they did. No, go and tell them they need to be sorry. Jesus is not just giving you the authority, he's telling you to do it, so that there won't be any friction in the church. That's the whole point. The point is not, has my ego been hurt? When I start thinking about my ego being hurt, that gets back to the world. The boastful pride of life and my ego and myself, and I'm on the center of the universe, and somebody hurt my feelings, and God's going to get them. No. My feelings have been hurt. That's a reality. So what do I need to do? Well, I need to man up or woman up. And I need to go talk to this person and explain to them, I don't think you meant to do it. Hopefully you'll be able to say that. I don't think you meant to say it, but this is what you did, or this is what you said, and I'm hurt over this. And I don't know, I've done this before, and I don't know how many times that individual has said, I did? I had no idea. Anybody else had that happen? They don't even know they've hurt you. I didn't mean for it to come out. That is what I said. I didn't realize how that must have sounded to you. That's horrible. I'm so sorry. And you hug each other and you go on your way. And there's resolution. There's forgiveness. And everything works out. It's scary. It's not something, I can't wait till the next time somebody sins so I can go to them and confront them about that. That's not what we think. We think we want to get out of it, Harold. That's right.
I totally dishonest you.
Yes.
You don't have any, there's no reason to be angry. And forgiveness is easy. I choose to do it.
We live in an imperfect world. You probably noticed that. I want people to forgive me. I want also to be able to forgive them. If I get forgiveness for the things I've done and I know that, then I'm much more at peace. But it's even more peaceful to know that I've forgiven somebody else. It works great both ways. Now, in this context, in Matthew 18, when Peter asked the question about 7 times, and Jesus says 70 times 7, he uses a parable to illustrate this settling of accounts. Verse 23, for this reason the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a king who wished to settle accounts with his slaves. When he begun to settle them, one who owed him 10,000 talents was brought to him. But since he did not have the means to repay, his Lord commanded him to be sold, along with his wife and children and all that he had, and repayment to be made. So the slave fell to the ground and prostrated himself before him, saying, have patience with me, and I will repay you everything. The Lord of that slave felt compassion and released him and forgave him the debt. Forgave, aphiemi, sent away the debt. But that slave went out and found one of his fellow slaves who owed him 100 denarii. How much did this guy owe? 10,000 talents. That's a lot more than denarii. But he found his partner who owed him 100 denarii, and he seized him and began to choke him, saying, pay back what you owe. So his fellow slave fell to the ground and began to plead with him, saying, "Have patience with me, and I will repay you." But he was unwilling and went and threw him in prison until he should pay back what he was owed. So when his fellow slaves saw what had happened, they were deeply grieved, came and reported to their lord all that had happened. And summoning him, his lord said to him, "You wicked slave, I forgave you all that debt because you pleaded with me. Should you not also have had mercy on your fellow slave in the same way that I had mercy on you?" And his lord, moved with anger, handed him over to the torturers until he should repay all that was owed him. My heavenly Father will also do the same to you if each of you does not forgive his brother from your heart. The bell rang. I got some thought questions. Let me ask some of these. Just a little food for thought, and we'll, Lord willing, come back to this next week. None of these are designed to be trick questions, so don't worry if you want to provide an answer about me hollering at you because it's wrong. Promise not to laugh when somebody answers. Number one, who is in charge of forgiveness? Overall, it's God. He's the one in charge of forgiveness. I'm not going to hold anything against anybody that's going to keep them out of heaven. But I am in charge of forgiving those who've sinned against me for my own benefit, not for theirs, but for my own benefit. Number two, we've already discussed this briefly. Just because you or I forgive some offender, does that mean God forgives them too? It does not. He is not obligated by our forgiveness to forgive others. Number three, who benefits more from a wrong forgiven? The one who forgives? I would say so. And here's one of the reasons. If I sin against somebody, and I'm sorry, and I apologize, God's going to forgive me, whether that person does or not. So, number four, how does holding something against someone punish them? Doesn't? I'll show him. I'll just be mad at him. It feels like it does, doesn't it? You ever had I've read about people who've had arguments with their spouses. And I'll just show them. I'll just be mad with them. And I've read about people who've done that and a whole day will go by and their spouse doesn't even know they're mad at them. Makes them so mad. I read about people who have that happen to them. What does holding a grudge involve? Constantly thinking about it. Oh, yeah. Oh, I remember. Yeah. Is there any sense of fun or pleasure? There must be something because people do it. There must be some sense of satisfaction in holding a grudge. We'll have to wait till next week probably to talk about that and why that is. But I see that as being true because I thought to myself, okay, if it wasn't something that we got some twisted pleasure out of, we wouldn't do it. Homework, for example. When's the last time you were in school and asked you, hey, will you send us some homework tonight? Nobody asks for homework because it's not fun. But we hold a grudge because there's some kind of satisfaction in that. We're tempted to do that. Listen.
It's a feeling of power, because you feel like you are in comfort over it.
You're getting ahead of us now. You're not allowed to have this conversation until next week. It's excellent. That's exactly the point. You do have, see, we're so limited in the power that we wield That when somebody does something against us, all right, now I've got some power. Now I can hold this over you. In reality, can we hold anything over anybody? Who's in charge of forgiveness? God is. And if He's in charge of forgiveness, I can't hold anything over anybody. All I can do is try to remind them, oh yeah, I remember when you did this, and try to bring it back up. But wait a minute now. What was the first thing we talked about in this class? Wasn't it love? 1 Corinthians 13, I think it's verse 5. Love keeps no record of wrong, or does not take wrong into account. Man, if I want to hold a grudge, I don't have any chance to justify myself by any scripture. Well, all right. Well, Leslie, you ruined it for next week because you gave away the... All right. Lord willing, we'll come back to this discussion next week.